Okay, let's dive in. When you hear the name Julius Caesar, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
For most people, it's the military genius, right? The guy who crossed the Rubicon, the brilliant politician.
Exactly. A figure so huge, so central to our history, we literally named a month after him. He's the blueprint for the powerful, ambitious leader.
He is. But that narrative is, well, it's a masterpiece of carefully managed propaganda. It focuses entirely on the strategy, the battles, the political wins.
And today we're going to push past that.
We're going to pivot hard. We want to look at the sheer, terrifying scale of his conquest in Gaul. We're talking 8 brutal years of campaigning.
And the sources on this, they're not ambiguous. They come straight from Caesar's own records, from his contemporaries. The human cost is just staggering.
It is. Roughly 1 million people killed in the fighting, and then another 1 million enslaved.
A million enslaved. And history always focuses on the battles, Alicia, Gergovia. But we're going into that hidden history, the story of that second million.
Specifically, the hundreds of thousands of women who were processed, who became a financial resource for Caesar's rise to power.
So that's our mission for this deep dive, to use the sources you provided to get beyond the sterile numbers and reveal the systematic administrative horror of this machine.
We want to see the system for what it was, a mechanism for maximum human value extraction, but seen through the eyes of the defeated.
And to really understand it, we need to ground this in a single human experience.
Exactly. So I want you to imagine Aona of the Arverni. She's 24 years old, and just a few hours ago, she was the wife of Vercingetorix, the war chief who united the Gallic tribes.
And now she's kneeling outside the fallen fortress of Alicia.
The sources are so visceral here, the smell of smoke in the air, the taste of blood in her mouth. She feels the cold bronze chain on her neck connected to a new iron collar.
That metallic click of the lock, that's it. That's the sound of her life as a queen ending and her new life as merchandise beginning.
And she's not alone. There are 47 other noble women kneeling with her, wives, daughters of chieftains, and this is where the Roman system kicks in.
An officer walks down the line, completely detached.
Completely. He's got a wax tablet and a stylus, and he's just cataloging them, noting their age, their condition, their potential market value.
He stops in front of Aona.
Okay.
And this is where we get that first real shock of the administrative cruelty. He dictates something to his scribe.
And that one note changes her entire fate. She's marked reserved imperial property.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning Caesar wants her for his triumph. The big parade back in Rome. It's the ultimate display of dominance. The order is specific. Hold her separately. No one touches her.
And the other 47 women?
He just waves a hand. Standard processing, he tells a junior officer. The young and beautiful go to the officer's pool for the march. The rest, to the general slave chain.
He actually says, the men will need entertainment for the long haul.
He does. And Aona, she would have understood enough Latin to know exactly what entertainment meant. A life of systematic, organized violence.
So that one moment, the click of the collar, that cold assessment, that's the transition. We're going to follow her and others like her through the processing camps, the long march, the spectacle of the triumph, and the decades of survival that came after. This isn't just a history of violence.
No, it's the administrative architecture of bureaucratic cruelty.
One of the things that really jumps out from the sources here is that this system, it wasn't chaotic. It wasn't just opportunistic abuse in the heat of the moment.
Not at all. That's the key. This was a refined, centuries-old administrative process. It had been perfected over generations of conquest.
So it was designed, it had a purpose.
2 purposes, really. Maximum value extraction from the captives, and at the same time, troop control. It kept the soldiers rewarded and occupied while ensuring the human product arrived at market in a sellable condition.
It's so chilling to hear you describe it like that. It sounds less like a military operation and more like a corporate supply chain.
That's exactly what it was. And the efficiency is the horror. We can actually trace the whole thing through these distinct stages. The first, right after the battle, was called the sortitio, the sorting.
And this happened quickly.
Within hours. Sometimes while the forts were still smoldering, they'd set up designated processing areas, just driving stakes into the ground to make holding pens.
And the first step of the sorting.
Ruthless separation. Men from women, women from children. And then came the cold math of profitability.
What do you mean?
The immediate disposal of the unprofitable, the elderly, the sick, anyone too injured or frail to survive a 4-month march to Italy. They were often killed right there.
Just executed on the spot.
It was a purely economic decision. They weren't seen as people. They were inventory that would slow down the logistical machine. Killing them was just optimizing the product flow.
It's hard to even wrap your head around that. A life or death decision based entirely on market value.
And for those who were deemed marketable, the process moved to the next stage, the inspeo, the inspection.
This was the detailed examination.
Incredibly detailed. Conducted by Roman military physicians and, critically, by slave traders who traveled with the legions. This was all about assessment, valuation, and classification.
So walk us through that. What was the inspeo actually like for these women?
It was a standardized, deeply traumatic procedure. It would last 15, maybe 30 minutes per woman. They were forced to stand naked, in the open, while complete strangers evaluated every part of their body.
What were they looking for?
Everything. Their teeth to judge age and health, their hair, muscle tone. They were meticulously noting scars, old injuries, any sign of illness. It was incredibly invasive.
And the goal was to assess their serviceability. That is just such a cold clinical term.
It is. And serviceability was comprehensive. It wasn't just about health. It was about fertility. Were they young enough to bear children? It was about beauty, and it was about their suitability for different kinds of labor.
Like what?
Domestic service, agricultural work, or what the texts euphemistically call ministerius corporis.
Bodily service, sex work.
Exactly. The inspeo was the official institutional mechanism that transformed a person into property.
And we can actually connect this process to modern psychology, can't we?
Yeah.
The sources point out that this systematic dehumanization was designed to induce specific trauma responses.
Yes, absolutely. It was designed to cause dissociation, that mental retreat from what's happening. It creates learned helplessness, the belief that you have absolutely no control, and something clinicians now call identity dissolution.
Identity dissolution. The system was actually built to destroy their sense of self.
Deliberately, by stripping away every marker of their identity. Their noble torques were ripped off, the forced nudity, the clinical dictation of their worth. It turns you from a person who has a life into a thing that is managed. The goal was to create a compliant resource.
And after that inspection, they were classified, put into one of 4 categories that would determine their entire future.
4 categories, and this classification was a stroke of terrible administrative genius. It determined everything.
Okay, so let's break them down. Category 1.
Category 1 was the top tier, the protected 20%. Women of exceptional beauty or very high noble status, like Iona. They were reserved for triumphs or as gifts to political allies.
So they were kept separate, fed better.
Yes, to maintain their appearance, but protected just meant restricted access. It was protection based on rank, not a guarantee of safety.
Right. Category 2.
Young, healthy women, good for wealthy households, domestic service, they were protected from excessive damage because that would lower their sale price.
And category 3. This was the largest group.
The largest by far. The expendable. These women were designated for camp service. They were essential for troop morale on the Long March. Their market value was discounted from the start, so any damage was just accepted as a cost of doing business.
Just a resource for the men. And finally, category 4.
The marginal. Women who were too old or not healthy enough to make the long trip to Rome profitable. They were sold off cheap at provincial markets along the way. Most of them didn't survive long.
It's staggering. So roughly 80% of all captured women fell into those last 2 categories, expendable or marginal.
Only the top 5th got even the illusion of protection.
So let's go back to Iona. Her inspection was different.
It was. As high-value inventory, she was taken to a separate tent. The physician, a man named Gaius Oppius, and his scribe conducted the examination there.
And we have a record of what he dictated.
We do, and it's profoundly dehumanizing. Gallic, approximately 24 years, good physical condition, no evidence of previous births, potentially fertile, temperament, fierce, requires careful management.
And then came the note that sealed her fate.
Reserved for the triumph, no access for common soldiers, officers only and only with explicit permission. It didn't mean she was safe, it just meant her body was a resource reserved for high-ranking men.
But Oppius didn't stop there, did he? He added one last calculated psychological blow.
He did. According to other survivors, he forced Iona to look out of the tent, to see the rows and rows of other naked women being cataloged, chained, beaten if they resisted.
He made her watch.
And then he said to her, "Your husband made them fight. This is what his war cost them. Remember that when you walk in Caesar's triumph, every woman in those chains is there because your husband refused to surrender sooner."
My God. He was trying to make her feel guilty for her own survival.
He was replacing her identity as a queen with an identity as a collaborator in her people's suffering. The system wasn't just processing bodies, it was dismantling the human will to resist.
So once the sorting and inspection was done, this logistical nightmare of a march from Gaul to Rome begins. We're talking 3 or 4 months on the road.
A grueling journey. The legions moved about 20 miles a day, every day, and these captive trains could stretch for miles. Thousands of people chained together.
And the mortality rate was just factored in from the start. You said between 10 and 30% of captives died on these marches.
It was an accepted cost. The primary killers were exposure, exhaustion, and disease. Dysentery would rip through the columns. But violence and despair also took a massive toll.
And the Roman system made specific choices that guaranteed that death toll.
Absolutely. Logistical discipline was everything. If a woman couldn't keep pace, if her feet were too raw or she got a fever, they didn't carry her.
They just left her.
Unchained her and abandoned her by the side of the road to die. And if anyone tried to escape and was caught, they were publicly executed. Their bodies left as a warning to everyone else in the chain.
It's pure terror as a management tool.
Exactly. And every single night, the violence was part of the routine. The Roman camp was a mobile city of control, built the same way every time.
And the administration of that violence, especially for the Category 3 women, was part of the nightly schedule. It wasn't chaos.
Not at all. There were procedures. Some legions had rotation schedules to make sure their resource was distributed evenly and keep morale up.
Others had soldiers bid for access.
Yes, using a portion of their pay, or it was just first come, first served. And this is where the administrative records are so chillingly clear.
They actually kept logs.
Detailed logs, lists of women, often just identified by the physical description, followed by tallies of how many soldiers had accessed them.
And the medical notes? That just lays the whole system bare.
It does. There are notes on injuries, but the notes are only about what treatments are needed to keep the women serviceable for the next night's rotation. It's resource management. Human misery managed with the same bureaucratic rigor as road building.
Meanwhile, Iona is in the noble transport. A completely different, but equally terrifying reality.
She and about 40 other high-value captives were in covered wagons. Better food, better conditions. She was a fragile commodity.
But the orders to keep them presentable were deliberately vague.
Very. And the centurion in charge, a man named Lucius Vorenus, he made his interpretation of those orders crystal clear.
What did he tell them?
He said, Caesar said to keep you presentable for Rome. He did not say to keep you untouched. There is a difference.
He was offering them a choice.
A calculated, coercive choice. Comply, and you get to keep a fragment of your dignity. You get warm blankets, full rations. Resist, and you'll be beaten. Then transferred to the general chain, your noble status gone forever.
He basically told them, you can arrive in Rome as a queen for the triumph or as broken goods for the nearest brothel.
That's the core of what we call deliberate trauma architecture. Using the threat of worse suffering as a tool of control. It forces the women to participate in their own degradation.
And Iona chose to survive. She was among the 60% of noble women who cooperated.
She was, and that forces a profound internal split. You have to tell yourself the necessary lies. Enduring isn't accepting. Compliance isn't consent. You have to dissociate your mind from your body to survive. The system ensures that even the act of survival is an act of self-betrayal.
To really get the scope of this, we have to look at some of the other women who went through this machine with Iona.
Yes, their stories illustrate the different outcomes of this administrative cruelty. Let's start with Brigantia of the Atrebates. She was 22 and 6 months pregnant when she was captured.
Which made her complicated but valuable inventory.
Exactly. The Roman system had protocols for this. Keep them until the birth, provide minimal care, and then separate mother and child for separate sale.
An extra piece of inventory.
A cold, pragmatic calculation. Brigantia gave birth about 2 months into the march in military camp in northern Italy.
What was that like?
Horrific. Attended by a Roman midwife whose only concern was the survival of both products. There was no comfort, no compassion. It was just an inventory event.
And the separation was
immediate.
Devastatingly fast. The baby boy was taken from her hours after he was born. He was logged in the records. Male, healthy, born in camp, and transported separately to be raised as a Roman slave.
Did she ever see him again?
Never. She screamed for him, but no one answered. She lived for another 14 years as a household slave and died at 36, never knowing what happened to her son. Her story is one of perpetual unanswered loss directly caused by administrative protocol.
Then you have the opposite, in a way, the story of defiance. Cartimandua of the Veneti.
She was 19, the daughter of a chieftain, categorized as top-tier merchandise. Her value made her a target.
For the centurion, Vorenus. Yes, he saw her as the finest piece. But Cartimandua fought back. She scratched his face badly enough to leave permanent scars.
And the retribution for that was swift.
Immediate and brutal, designed as a lesson for the other women. She was beaten unconscious, stripped of her high-value status, and thrown into the general chain with the Category 3 expendables.
Her value was intentionally destroyed as a punishment.
Utterly. The medical logs from the next 3 months tell the story. Repeated notes about a young Veneti girl needing superficial treatment, just enough to keep her walking to the next market.
She was sold in Rome for a fraction of her original value.
Less than a tenth. Sold to a brothel in the Suburra district, Rome's most notorious neighborhood. She was dead 4 years later at 23. The cause was listed as fever, but it was violence and neglect. Her resistance was met with total rapid destruction.
And finally, Vala of the Nervi. Her story introduces this other layer of control: preemptive punishment.
Vala was 31, and she had a history. She had been captured once before and escaped. The Romans had her on file. She was designated a flight risk.
So she was watched more closely, chained differently.
A shorter lead, bound hands, an ankle shackle with a heavy weight. But she was made an example of, not for something she did, but because someone else tried to escape.
Explain that.
Another captive made a run for it and was quickly recaptured. The commander decided the whole column needed a reminder of Roman power. So they chose Vala, because of her history, for a demonstration torture.
A public demonstration.
In the torchlight of the camp, witnessed by hundreds of other women. This is a specific psychological tactic.
What's the goal of demonstration torture?
To control the entire group. When the witnesses see that, they feel two things at once. Completely powerless to stop it, and intensely grateful it's not them. It teaches them that Roman authority is total and inescapable.
Vala survived it.
She did. She survived another 22 years of slavery, but the sources say she developed trauma-induced mutism. She never spoke again.
She died at 53, in silence.
Yeah.
A living testament to what the system could do to a person's mind.
Absolutely. Her silence was the final result of that administrative trauma.
It's impossible to talk about this without addressing the common narrative about Caesar's clemency. He was famous for sparing defeated leaders.
It's one of history's most successful PR campaigns. But when you look at the sources, that clemency was a calculated political tool that never, ever extended to the families or the people.
You call it a lie, but wasn't it better than just slaughtering everyone?
It was a highly selective strategy. He would spare a chieftain's life so he could parade him through Rome, but at the same time, he'd destroy that man's entire lineage by selling his wife and children into slavery. The clemency was performative.
And he was completely open about it in his own writings.
Proud of it. There's a quote about the Veneti where he says, "I therefore put to death all their chief men and sold the rest into slavery." Just like that. 5 words to cover up the camps, the inspections, the marches, everything we've been talking about.
And the money from this. This is what funded his rise to power.
Completely. The 1 million enslaved people generated an estimated 100 million sesterces in revenue. That's the financial engine that allowed Caesar to march on Rome. This system was designed to be immensely profitable.
Which brings us to the triumph, the Grand Parade in 46 BCE, a full 6 years after the fall of Alesia.
6 long years. And for all that time, Aeona was basically in storage, held in a facility outside Rome, kept in reasonable condition, like a valuable museum piece waiting for its display.
On the day of the triumph, she's 30 years old. And she's about to be paraded in chains in front of 700,000 Romans.
And the spectacle was carefully designed. The captured male warriors were kept starved and dirty to look defeated, but the noblewomen, like Aeona, were treated differently.
They were cleaned up, dressed in fine Gallic clothes.
Yes, to make them look like the queens they once were. It made the spectacle of their humiliation that much more complete for the crowd.
And her guards coached her on how to act.
They did. They told her, "Walk with dignity, barbarian. Caesar wants a proud enemy to defeat, not a broken slave. Look like a queen." She had to participate in her own degradation.
And the procession pauses in the Forum, the heart of Rome. She's deliberately positioned where she can see everything.
She hasn't seen her husband, Vercingetorix, in 6 years. And now she watches as he's brought forward, forced to kneel before Caesar in a final act of submission.
And then he's taken away and publicly strangled.
She's forced to watch her husband be executed for the entertainment of a crowd. The sources say she didn't scream, didn't collapse, she didn't give them the satisfaction.
But internally, the damage must have been absolute.
Psychologists call it witnessed execution trauma. It creates chronic dissociation, and it shatters your belief in any kind of meaningful order in the world. Her entire internal world was annihilated that day.
And immediately after this, she's taken to the slave market.
The forum boreum, the cattle market, the symbolism was not subtle.
She's put on a platform, stripped, with a placard describing her.
Gallic noble, widow of Vercingetorix, age 30, previously unowned, undamaged.
That word, undamaged. That is the ultimate bureaucratic lie.
It is. It was a technical term. It meant she had no visible injuries, no diseases. It completely erased the 6 years of confinement, the psychological torment, witnessing her husband's murder. It was just marketing.
And she was sold to a wealthy senator, a collector of exotic slaves.
Marcus Junius Silanus. He told her exactly what her job was. Be an ornament to my household. Tell my guests your story. She was a living trophy, forced to relive her tragedy for the amusement of her captors.
Iona spends 11 years in that house, a gilded cage. She learns Latin, she learns Roman politics, but she's completely isolated.
The home she knew was gone. There was nothing to escape to. And then at a dinner party, her life changes again. Mark Antony is there.
Antony had served in Gaul. He knew her story.
And he was fascinated by her resilience, not her victimhood. He buys her from Silanus that night. She's still property, changing hands.
But Antony wanted something different from her. He didn't want a trophy.
He wanted an intelligence asset. He told her, Caesar is planning new campaigns. Parthia, Britain. I need insight into the Gallic mind, into the psychology of the defeated.
He saw her survival not as a passive thing, but as a source of specialized knowledge.
And this presented her with this brutal moral compromise. Help the system that destroyed your people or remain an object.
And she chose to collaborate.
She did. She began advising the Roman military command on tribal psychology, on how to manage conquered peoples most efficiently.
From a survival standpoint, this makes sense. It's a classic example of what experts call identification with the aggressor.
Exactly. You adopt the perspective of those in power to secure your own safety and find some meaning. She gained respect, even from Caesar, but the internal cost must have been immense.
She told herself she was mitigating the cruelty of future campaigns.
Unnecessary rationalization, but her survival now felt hollow because it depended on the machine she hated.
And this strange collaboration lasts until 40 BCE. Antony's about to leave for Egypt and Cleopatra.
And he grants her freedom? He gives her a choice?
Yeah.
Stay in his household with his protection or take her independence?
She chose freedom. After 20 years as property.
She did, and Antony's final words to her are so telling. He says, you were never really a slave, not in your mind. You adapted, you survived, but you never accepted it.
He gives her money, her papers, and she's alone. A free woman in Rome.
And she lives for another 34 years. She dies at 78 in 6 BCE. She never went back to Gaul.
What did she do?
She became a successful translator and advisor for Roman merchants and officials who were administering Gaul, still indirectly helping the system.
Still caught between two worlds.
Always. She never remarried. She was a collaborator to the Gauls and a barbarian oddity to the Romans, but her long, costly survival made her a unique witness.
She remembered the others? Brigantia, Cardamondua, Vala.
She did. Her final words, spoken in Gallic, were simply, I remember. I remember all of it.
And her story is so exceptional statistically. The data shows that 65% of captured women died within 5 years. Only 10% were ever freed.
Her survival was not a victory. It was a statistical anomaly that allowed her to bear witness against an overwhelming system.
So when you pull it all together, Iona's story, backed by these administrative records, it proves one thing very clearly. The suffering of these women wasn't collateral damage.
It was deliberate, documented, and profitable policy. It was categorized and administered with a chilling precision.
The entire system, from the first click of that iron collar, was a factory of human degradation, and Caesar was the CEO.
And this is the crucial historical connection that we often miss. The methods that Caesar's legions perfected, the categorization, the inspections, the processing camps, the record-keeping, they didn't just disappear with Rome.
They became the template.
They became the template. This knowledge of how to efficiently exploit human beings was refined by the Byzantines, used in medieval systems, and critically, it was foundational to colonial exploitation.
You're saying there's a direct line from this
To the administrative techniques of the Atlantic slave trade. The logistics of moving thousands of Gallic women became the intellectual foundation for the systems that moved millions of Africans. The horrors of later centuries were a continuation of administrative knowledge first systematized by Rome.
And this is the history that gets glossed over, so we can celebrate the aqueducts and the law without acknowledging the crimes that financed them.
Exactly. The women were just numbers in Caesar's accounts, but they were real. Their suffering wasn't fate, it was profitable policy. Remembering Aeona, Brigantia, and Valla is necessary because their stories challenge the celebratory history we're taught.
So this is the final thought we want to leave you with. When we study Caesar's genius, we are studying a system built on institutionalized horror. What does it mean for us, for modern civilization, to claim heritage from an empire whose administrative brilliance was first and most effectively applied to systematically processing human beings into property?
It means we have to hold that complexity, to acknowledge the achievements while unflinchingly confronting the atrocities. The price of Roman glory was paid in the suffering of people whose stories were deliberately erased. Our job now is simply to remember.